Hello, I'm so glad you could join me today at Red Pine Quilt Shop in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota. I'm Connie, and today I want to share with you some tips on machine straight line quilting. It's easy to do. You can do it with your own machine. I'd also like to show you why sometimes the straight line might be your most effective choice in quilting for the pieces that you're making. Well, let's start out with setting up your workspace. One of the things you want to do when you're quilting a piece, especially if it's like crib size or single size, is to expand the support area of your sewing table. So I pull mine out, I put up an ironing board so that the quilt can rest on the ironing board. I may also put up a card table, something like that. You just want to be sure that your quilt top, while you're not actually quilting on it, isn't pulling its weight off the side of your table. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'm going to encourage all of you to do is to clean your machine. Start with a clean machine. Add some new needle. Put a new needle in. You start like that and you're going to have better results. Another thing that I would really encourage you to do, begin with full bobbins. This is not the time to be using up your partial bobbins. Fill 2 or 3, depending how big your quilt is, maybe 4, and just have them ready to go so that you're not having to start and stop. Next, you're going to want to choose which foot you're going to use. Now, I like to use my dual feed foot for my straight line quilting. But you could use other feet. For example, these have open toes, so you're going to really see what you're sewing and where you're going. A walking foot, a dual feed, or these feet would all give you really good results. So there are some of the setups. Tools. Painter's tape. Painter's tape is an excellent way to put down a line on your fabric that you can just pull up. I wouldn't leave this on for weeks, but definitely you can lay it down. It gives you a bit of a guide. You can move it. I set lines also with chalk. I especially like this pencil that has the 3 colors. So those are some of the tools that I like to use when I'm getting ready to do my straight line quilting. You're going to need to make your sandwich. I use the 505, but I really follow the directions on the back. I did once glue my quilt sandwich down to the point where it gummed up my needles and pulled on the thread, and I had to start over. So follow the directions, especially the one about holding it away from the fabric and giving it just a quick kind of a whirl around. You're not saturating it. Be careful with that, and it's going to do the job that you're hoping for. The other tools I like to use are these gloves. And these gloves, they come in 4 different sizes, so you can definitely get a pair that's going to be the right size for you. I love the extra grip that it gives me, and you can see not everything is always clean, but it does keep your quilt clean, keeps your hands clean as you're working with it. So there's some tools and the setup. Well, let's talk about how you do it. Probably the easiest is going to be kind of natural wobbly straight lines. So you notice these lines aren't perfectly straight. They're not completely even. They wibble wobble a little bit, and they just follow across the quilt. Here's the back side. Flannel. Here's how I start. You're going to have to manage the size. So I like to roll my pieces. Some people accordion fold, some people just smush it up. Try and see different things. I always begin on one side. I'm going to put my needle down through the 3 layers. I'm going to put it through the top, the batting, and the backing. So I've got it there. Now, in the larger pieces, I'm probably going to drive it down. I'm going to hold it, let the machine do the work, and I'm just going to sew along. I'm going to sew until I go off the other end. Cut my thread and move back. I'm going to move a bit over. Again, I'm putting the needle down through the 3 layers. I do that so that I'm not sewing onto the top and having a risk of it kind of pushing a little bit. And let the machine do the work, slow and steady. Resist the temptation to do drag racing with your sewing. Slow and steady is going to work through this. I would go all the way, moving 1 line at a time till I get to the edge. Then I'm either going to roll it up back to the middle and move out this way, or for one time I could turn the whole quilt and work from here out. Now the reason that I usually start always at the same side is so that if there's shifting that's happening between the batting and the backing and the top, the shifting is all going one direction. It's when you're switching back and forth that you might have a shift this way and a shift that way, and you end up with a fold or a pucker on the back. So that's why I always start from one end. Again, you're going to have to manage the size. This isn't too big, but it did require that I fold or scrunch it up so that it would fit on my sewing machine. Table runners are great sizes to start with, as would a doll quilt or placemats. Really easy sizes to start with. So there's straight line. And you see, I did not worry about it being really straight. What do they call this? Organic, where it's just sort of natural. I really like making Elizabeth Hartman quilts. This is my 4th one. I'm working on a 5th one right now. And I've struggled, how do you quilt it? Well, I decided to do a diagonal straight line. There's a lot going on this quilt. One of them I tried quilting the animal and then did a background. Another one I did a edge to edge. But this has been my favorite. I think the diagonal is really effective. Couple different tips for doing the diagonal. You are working on the bias and you're going diagonally across the quilt, so there is a slight challenge to that. I did mark a couple of my long pieces, so I started with the longest one I could. It's almost across the quilt. Same thing. I put my needle down through the 3 layers and then slowly started quilting across. In this case, I wanted to be careful that I wasn't pulling, but I didn't want the bias or that stretch on the diagonal to distort the bottom or the backing or the top. So I would just sew along like this. I come back, start here, and went across. Then finally, when I had worked my way out this far, roll it up again, and then I'd start working this way. And again, if you wanted to, one time, you could turn it and start from this angle and go this direction if you wanted to. I really don't recommend going back and forth because you just run the risk of having puckers and folds in the back. This quilt I'm sure has been washed at least 4 or 5 times. It has a wool batting in it. I love the kind of ruching and the texture that happens. So this is my example of maybe straight line quilting is your best choice. I just think it ends up being very effective. So there's your straight lines, either perpendicular or diagonally. There are some other straight lines that you can use. Let's take a look at this one. Is kind of a wave. Now, I don't stitch in the ditch. I think it's hard, but this one is just a little wavy. And you notice I began on one end, went across, and here I could kind of just drive it a little. Machine did the work. I just sort of wobbled it a little here and there over the stitching line. Then I went to this side and this side, turned it, and then started in the middle and went out. Wouldn't this be attractive if you had 3-inch squares or 2.5-inch squares? I think this would really look nice. Look at the back. Simple, but it's doing the job. You quilt a quilt so that you've secured the backing, the batting, and the top. And certainly in an attractive way. Perhaps you've noticed I use the same color bobbin thread as top thread. The reason I do that is so that if I have some little issue with my tension and the bobbin thread is showing on the top or the other way, if I have two colors, that's going to be more pronounced. I mean, ideally, I want my tension to be perfect, but in some situations where it gets a little bit off before I notice it to fix it, having the same color thread on both sides is going to minimize that. It's my little tip for you. So you can also do straight line quilting. This is called radiating. And you notice I started the greens. I started on one corner and just sewed across. And then I went to the red corner and sewed the other way. Another style of this is called shattered. And on the shattered, you notice I started with the teal color and I was going across the quilt. It wasn't really planned. I rotated the quilt, started with the purple side, and just went across. I might have started here. But that's shattered. And again, I got these ideas from Krista Watson. Look at this one. This is the shattered. And for a quilt that's not really big, I think it's very attractive. I originally thought this thread would be kind of an accent, but it's interesting how it just blends in, isn't it? Now on this one, you can clearly see that when I started with my needle down through all 3 layers, and I completely drove off the end over here. I try to always avoid having to put a new bobbin in or have my thread break halfway across. It's just easier to do it off the end and before you start again. And I would say I have on both of the quilts, the finished ones that I showed you, I did take out one seam on each of those that I wasn't happy with. It's possible to do it. It wasn't a setback. I didn't have to start over, but I was more pleased with how it ended up when I took out that one line of stitching that just wasn't quite right. You can do it. It's not impossible. So this one is not shattered, it is radiating. So although these are all straight line quilts, they're different. It isn't just parallel lines. Well, let me show you, I always keep just a sandwich ready where I can try stuff out, thread, whatever. Look at this one right here. I tried different stitches on my machine, and I had several that I was able to do. And I think those are pretty interesting. In fact, I'm a little bit sorry, like with this top, wouldn't a couple of lines with a contrast color have been fun? I could have put them this way, I could have put them this way, they could go all the way across, I could just start them part way across. I'm kind of sorry I didn't think of that while I was working on that top. So there you see some different choices. So straight line isn't boring, and it can be just very effective with what you're trying to do. Sometimes it's your best choice. Oh, I have a couple more tops to show you. These were small challenges that I quilted using the straight line quilting. This was a challenge for reverse applique. And I just quilted, and then I decided it needed a little pop of color, so I went across here. Simple. This was a challenge. And you see, these are all straight lines. This is small enough to where I did stop and turn my whole piece around and go back the other way. Maybe it shows better on this side. So I could really use the piecing, and those branches kind of determined where I was going to quilt. This was also a challenge for the local quilt guild. And again, these are curvy straight lines, and because it's small enough, I was able to just stop and turn and go back. And when you do that, you have to plan a bit. You don't want to paint yourself into a corner. Perhaps this side shows a little better. But again, using the same color on top and bottom, if either of the threads pull through a bit, it's not going to be noticeable. Well, I hope I've given you some tips and tools so you can start your own machine straight line quilting. And I hope I've also convinced you that sometimes I think it's a very effective way to quilt your pieces. Thanks for watching.